Forest fires have fallen by 82%, at a time when some regions in the Americas, Australia, and Europe experienced the largest increase. Second, we must advance green development for a better world. Indonesia has updated its NDC to enhance the capacity of climate adaptation and resilience. We welcome the upcoming UNFCCC COP26 in the UK and look forward to an implementable and balanced outcome. We welcome several countries' target to achieve net zero emission by 2050. However, to ensure its credibility, such commitment should be implemented based on the 2030 NDC commitments. Developing countries will implement similar ambitions. If developed countries' commitments are credible, accompanied by concrete support, the fulfillment of commitments and support by developed countries are indeed a necessity. Third, to achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement and other shared agenda, global partnership must be strengthened, must build understanding and strategies to reach net zero emissions and towards UNFCCC COP26 Glasgow. Indonesia is accelerating its pilot projects for net zero emission, including in the construction of Indonesia Green Industrial Park, covering an area of 12,500 hectares in North Kalimantan, which will become the largest in the world. We are rehabilitating 620,000 hectares of mangroves by 2024, the largest in the world, with 4 times carbon absorption compared to tropical forests. Indonesia is open to investments and transfers of technology, including for energy transitions. There is also great opportunities in the development of biofuels, lithium battery industry, and electric vehicles. Indonesia's G20 presidency in 2022 in the Pacific. We should continuously advance concrete global partnership instead of attributing blame. Worse so is applying trade barriers under the guise of environmental issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor is now to the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Ramaphosa.
Thank you, Your Excellency, President Joe Biden, and Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start off by thanking President Biden for convening this Leaders' Summit on climate. We are all so delighted to have the United States back, working with all of us to tackle the global challenge of climate change. Climate change is the most pressing issue of our time. It is a global phenomenon from which developing economies are particularly vulnerable, especially on our African continent. Without effective adaptation, climate change has the potential to reverse the developmental gains in many of the countries on the continent and push millions of people further into poverty and unemployment. In doing so, we have to adhere to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Poor countries have historically contributed least to global emissions. Developing countries often suffer the most from the devastating effects of climate change, particularly in the form of drought, extreme storms, and rising sea levels, as well as floods. Consequently, developed economies, we hold the view, have a responsibility to support developing economies to enable them to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Significant progress can be made when we all honor our mutual commitments. We therefore need to emphasize the primacy of multilateralism in ensuring the full implementation of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. South Africa is fully committed to enhancing its ambition and accelerating its climate actions. Last year, we finalized our National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy, which coordinates all actions at government level and at national level. We have also adopted a low emissions development strategy in pursuit of a just transition to a low carbon, sustainable and climate resilient developmental pathway. We are currently in the process of updating South Africa's nationally determined contribution. Our new NCD target ranges have been released for public consultation. The new target ranges we are proposing are much more ambitious in two respects. Firstly, the top of the 2030 range has been reduced by 28%, or 174 million metric tons, which is a very significant reduction. Second, according to our previous nationally determined contribution, South Africa's emissions would peak and plateau in 2025 and decline only from 2035. South Africa's emissions will begin to decline from 2025, effectively shifting our emissions decline 10 years earlier. With regard to our energy source, we plan to build capacity to generate over 17 gigabytes of renewable energy by 2030. We remain committed to contributing our fair share to reduce global emissions and to do so in the context of overcoming poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment. The move towards a low-carbon, climate-resilient society cannot happen overnight. We need to work together to create a climate-resilient society, and amongst other things, we should firstly ensure that as we transit to a more climate-resilient future, it must be based on a just transition that ensures that those who are most vulnerable in society do not get left behind. Secondly, it is critical that all three of the goals of the Paris Agreement, its mitigation, adaptation, and finance, should be advanced with equal determination and ambition. Thirdly, we must scale up support in the form of financing, technology, and capacity building. It will not be possible for developing economy countries, including those in Africa, to enhance ambition on either adaptation or mitigation. Fourthly, it is important that aid on climate change should be provided separately and should not be part of conventional development assistance. When it is given in the form of loan financing, the debt burden of developing countries is worsened. We call on developed economies, which historically bear the greatest responsibility for emissions, to meet their responsibilities to developing economies. This will be vital to restoring the bonds of trust between developed and developing economies. As we have done since the time of our revered leader Nelson Mandela, South Africa stands ready to work with other nations to build bridges to find solutions that secure humanity's future. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor is now to the President of the Council of Ministers of the Italian Republic, Prime Minister Mario Draghi. Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking President Biden for his leadership in taking this initiative. As Chancellor Merkel just said, it's a complete change. Now, we are confident that together we'll win this challenge. President Biden, dear colleagues, as we fight the pandemic in our countries, we cannot lose sight of the other crises we face. Tackling climate change. In the Paris Agreement, we pledged to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. But the actions we've taken since have proven insufficient. Under current policies, we are set to achieve 3 degrees of global warming. We need to reverse course and do it soon. The fiscal plans we are designing to help our countries recover from the COVID-19 offer a unique opportunity. We can transform our economies and pursue a greener and more inclusive growth model. In Europe, we launched a 750 billion euro joint plan, what we call the Next Generation EU. One of its objectives is to support the environmental transition in Europe and make the EU carbon neutral by 2050. Around 10% of it, roughly 70 billion euros, will go for investment in green infrastructures, circular economy, and sustainable mobility in Italy only. Italy is my own country, is a beautiful but a fragile country. The fight against climate change is a fight for our history, a fight for our landscapes. We need to frame our efforts towards sustainability within an effective and inclusive multilateral approach. Italy holds the presidency of the G20 this year, and the safeguard of our planet is the main objective of our program. G20 countries account for 75% of global emissions. We have a special responsibility in ensuring we deliver on the objectives of the Paris Agreement. The Italian presidency has proposed to hold a joint climate and energy ministerial meeting. A strong resolve by the G20 will also boost the chances for a successful COP26 conference in Glasgow. As the partner of the UK for COP26, Italy is committed to give its contribution by hosting the pre-COP26 in Milan, an event Youth for Climate. International climate finance plays also an important role in achieving these objectives. Italy has committed to use its shareholding in the multilateral development banks to set high targets for climate finance and to ensure their activities are aligned with the Paris Agreement. We look forward to hosting the second edition of the Financing Common Summit of all public development banks as part of our G20 presidency. We must also help the most vulnerable countries. Last December, Italy pledged 30 million euros to the United Nations Adaptation Fund. The climate commitments we make now will determine our chances of tackling climate change effectively in the next decade and beyond. We want to act now, not to regret it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. We turn now to the President of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, His Excellency David Kabua.
Excellencies, Yagwe, and greetings from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Thank you, President Biden, for bringing us together. Our actions today have a direct bearing upon the future and security of my nation and for others in the Pacific and beyond. We are a low-lying atoll nation, barely a meter above sea level. For millennia, our people have navigated between our islands to build thriving communities and cultures. Today, we are navigating through the storm of climate change, determined to do our part to steer the world to safety. We know what a safe harbor looks like. The Marshall Islands, with Haoses, fought for years to to create consensus around a 1.5 degree Celsius temperature goal. In 2015, we brought together the High Ambition Coalition to turn the 1.5 to stay alive, rallying cry into a call shared by all parties to the Paris Agreement. The role of the Act is even more important today to ensure that 1.5 remains in reach. Our key task this year is to ensure that updated national emissions commitments are in line with that goal. NDCs are where ambition moves from promise to plan. Given how far off track the world is today, it is vital that we come together every 5 years to increase ambition. All nations should also be charting long-term net zero strategies and implementation pathways before COP26. Too often, vulnerable countries hear the excuse that steep emission cuts are too costly, but political signals, especially from the major economies, shape decisions on investment and innovation for low-carbon pathways. Now is the moment for this signal to be unequivocal. The recovery from COVID-19 gives us a rare chance to invest in a safer and healthier world. Sector-wide transformation are possible. Together with the Solomon Islands, we are pushing for stronger emission action at the IMO through a carbon levy to fund research and help the most vulnerable. Leading from front lines, we were the first to strengthen our NDCs in 2018, and we have a 2050 net zero strategy paired with an electricity roadmap as our implementation pathway. We recently celebrated the success of the Micronesia Challenge, and we'll be joining the local 2030 Islands Network. But all our actions will not be enough if big emitters fail to act. We feel the effects of climate change now, and so we are also leading the way to on adaptation. We deliver our adaptation communications in 2020 and are developing our national adaptation plan. Adequate and accessible financing is key, and so I support the call for 50% of climate financing to go towards adaptation. I'll conclude by asking my fellow leaders, how will you move from plans to implementation to align with a 1.5 degree future and help others do the same? Your answer will define the future for your children and grandchildren and for mine. Kumol Dada.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. President Biden, we know you have to step away for a few moments. We look forward to having you back here shortly, but any words before you depart?
Well, I apologize for having to leave for a few minutes. I'll be back shortly, but it's an encouraging start. There's a lot to do. I get this feeling that we are really beginning to make some real progress, so I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Thanks, Mr. President. The floor is now to the President of the Argentine Republic, His Excellency Alberto Fernandez. Mr. President.
Muy buenos días desde Buenos Aires, Argentina. Buenos días a todos y a todas.
And from Buenos Aires, Argentina, good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for the invitation given to me by President Biden. Today is the Earth Day, and we have to work together. I am so happy that the U.S. is reinvesting again. Argentina considers the climate change as a key issue, as 50 years ago, General Perón said, we have to be aware of the suicidal path that we are working because of the contamination. It's now or never. In Argentina, we part of the Paris Agreement, and we included in our national cabinet climate change as one of our ministers so that they can set up the mitigation plan that is going to be submitted to the COP26 in Glasgow. Therefore, what we are going to say is which our new commitments are. First, we're going to increase our contribution 27% vis-a-vis the 2016. There are two additional issues of what we submitted in 2016. This is coincides with the objective of 1.5 centigrades and net zero emission. We are committed to develop 30% of our energy network with renewables, and we have a plan, a very efficient for the industry, transportation, construction. We will promote the adoption of cutting-edge technologies to reduce methane emissions and contaminants. We will also have a plan to export hydrogen. We will adapt very deep measures to eradicate illegal deforestation, and it will classify it as a crime. We will have a new bill to protect native forests, and we will also promote the rapid law of education regarding environmental issues. We have to work together, and therefore we have to remember what our Pope Francis says. The social and ecological crisis are two faces of the same issue, and they are linked. And as President Macron just said, we need to renew the financial architecture. The agenda is very clear. We have to have soft loans with bilateral and multilateral banks. We have to pay for services and swap of debt for environmental actions. We cannot discriminate those countries that are the medium-sized countries, and we have to make sure that the qualified and the agents that qualify our countries have to be aware of what our realities are and what are the issues that make our countries go into debt, in this case due to the COVID, and we have to have better terms of payment. Therefore, I hope that out of this summit we have a new path. This is a time to dream. I talk to all my colleagues in Latin America and Caribbean. We have to coordinate regional measures, social measures. The new generations are looking at us. We cannot doubt anymore. Nobody can work by himself or herself. We have to work together. We have to have social justice, financial justice, and environmental justice. Thank you very much.
The floor to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Dear President Biden, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a little over 5 years ago, the world came together to sign the Paris Agreement. Today, we have to strengthen that global unity around ambitious new goals, because this will be the make or break decade for our climate. And therefore, I want to thank President Biden for convening this meeting on Earth Day. The Paris Agreement is humanity's life insurance. And at the COP26 in Glasgow, we must show that we all have understood this and that we are ready for more climate action, because we are getting dangerously close to 1.5 degrees of global warming. Science tells us it's not too late yet, but we must hurry up. And that is what Europe is doing. 11 days after taking office, my Commission launched the European Green Deal for transforming our economy. And yesterday, we agreed Europe's first ever climate law with the European Parliament and our 27 governments, as Angela Merkel mentioned. With this, we write into stone the goal to set out by the European Green Deal to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. And we have also agreed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. In June, my Commission will table proposals to make Europe fit for 55. We will make emission trading work not only for energy generation and industry, but also for transport and for buildings. Carbon must have its price because nature cannot pay the price any longer. But Fit for 55 is not just about emissions. We will safeguard our nature and enhance biodiversity, going for nature-based solutions wherever possible. And we will ensure that all this is done in a just and inclusive way. Because for our ambition to succeed, we must leave nobody behind. Climate action is also a massive opportunity for our economies. It creates new markets, it mobilizes investment in new and transforming industries, and it unleashes innovation for a healthier and more prosperous future. And this is why 30% of Europe's recovery plan, Next Generation EU, Mario Draghi mentioned it, altogether 1.8 trillion euro, is earmarked for climate-related goals. The fight against climate change will be the engine for our global recovery. And it will be our compass for cooperation with all of you in many areas, in research, innovation, and breakthrough technologies through forums like Mission Innovation, or in helping vulnerable countries to become resilient to climate change. Europe wants to be the first climate-neutral continent in the world, but to save the climate, we need the world. We need all major economies to take their responsibility and to turn the transition into an opportunity for all. Let's set together a new global benchmark for climate neutrality. Let us work together on a shared commitment and joint action for reducing emissions by 2030. This puts us on a pathway to net zero emissions by 2050. And that is what our planet needs. Thank you again, President Biden, for this meeting. It is so good to have the US back on our side in the fight against climate change. Together we can go faster and get further, and together we will win the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I now turn the floor to His Majesty King Salman, custodian of the two holy mosques and king of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Your Majesty.
Your Majesties, Highnesses, and Excellencies, dear participants, in the beginning we would like to thank President Biden for holding this summit to combat climate change, which threatens life on our planet. These challenges recognize no national borders. The objective is sustainable development, and in order to achieve this, there must be a comprehensive methodology that takes into account the different developmental circumstances that exist around the world. In accordance with the Saudi Vision 2030, we have launched packages of strategies and regulations such as the National Environmental Strategy with the aim of producing 50% of the kingdom's energy need by 2030 using clean, renewable sources. Enhancing the level of international cooperation is the optimal solution to meeting the challenges of climate change. During our G20 presidency last year, we advocated the need to adopt the notion of a circular carbon economy, launching 2 international initiatives to curb land degradation and to protect coral reefs. More recently, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince announced 2 new initiatives, the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative, which aim at reducing carbon emissions in the region by more than 10% of global contributions. These initiatives also aim at planting 50 billion trees in the region, in addition to a number of unique initiatives. These 2 initiatives have been endorsed by the international community. we will work with our partners to achieve their goals by hosting this year the Green Saudi Initiative Forum and the Middle East Green Initiative Summit. Finally, we would like to affirm our keenness on and commitment to cooperation to combat climate change in order to create a better environment for future generations, wishing success for our efforts to protect our planet, and may peace be with you.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty. The floor is now to the President of the Federal Republic of Brazil, President Bolsonaro. Mr. President.
Heads of state, heads of government, ladies and gentlemen, President Joe Biden, I thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this summit, leaders. Historically, Brazil has been an active voice in efforts to build a global environmental agenda. Today, I renew our credentials, which are supported not only by our achievements so far, but also by the commitments that we stand ready to take on before future generations. As the home of the planet's greatest biodiversity and as an agri-environmental powerhouse, Brazil is at the very forefront of efforts to tackle global warming. As we get together to discuss climate change, we cannot possibly forget the major cause of the problem at hand, and that is the burning of fossil fuels in the course of the past 2 centuries. Brazil has accounted for less than 1% of the historic greenhouse gas emissions, even as one of the world's largest economies. Currently, Brazil accounts for less than 3% of annual global emissions. We have in place one of the cleanest energy mixes in the world, marked by renewed investments in solar, wind, hydro, and biomass-based energy. We are a pioneering country in the dissemination of biofuels, renewable biofuels such as ethanol, which help clean up our urban centers. In the countryside, we have promoted a green revolution based on science and innovation. We produce more using less resources, which makes Brazilian agriculture one of the most sustainable practices on the planet. We are proud to conserve 84% of the Brazilian Amazonian biome and 12% of the Earth's drinking water resources. As a result, in the past 15 years alone, we have avoided the emission of more than 7.8 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. In the light of our common but differentiated responsibilities, we continue to collaborate towards global efforts against climate change. We are one of the few developing countries to adopt and to reaffirm a cross-cutting and comprehensive NDC, including absolute targets for reducing emissions, even already for 2025 by 37%, and a reduction of up to 40% by 2030. Mr. President, we could not agree more with your call for establishing ambitious commitments on the climate agenda. Accordingly, I have determined that our climate neutrality in Brazil be achieved by 2050, therefore bringing forward by 10 years the previously announced commitment levels. Among the measures that are required to that end, may I highlight here our commitment to eliminate illegal deforestation in Brazil by 2030, with full and prompt enforcement of the Brazilian Forest Code. With that, we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 50% by that date. One must recognize that this will be a complex task. Command and control measures are part of the response. Despite our administration's budget constraints, I have nevertheless determined that the environmental bodies be further strengthened, thereby doubling funds allocated to inspection actions. But it is necessary to do more. We must face the challenge of improving the life of more than 23 million Brazilians who live in the Amazonian region, the country's richest nation as far as natural resources are concerned, but again, a region posting the worst human development indices. Overcoming the so-called Amazonian paradox or contradiction is a key and essential condition for sustainable development in that region. We must also enhance land governance and make the bioeconomy a reality by truly acknowledging the value of the standing forest and biodiversity. This must be an effort that will envisage and accommodate the interests of all Brazilians, to include indigenous peoples and traditional communities. In view of the magnitude of these obstacles, including financial obstacles, it is key that we be able to count on the contribution of companies, the business community, institutions, and people willing to act immediately as well as in a real and constructive fashion towards the solution to these problems. This year, the international community will have a unique opportunity to collaborate towards efforts to build our common future. COP26 will have as one of its main missions the task of fully adopting the mechanisms envisaged under Articles 5 and 6 of the Paris Agreement. Carbon markets are critical as a source of funds and investments to propel and boost our climate action, not only in forests, but also in other relevant sectors of the economy, such as industrial activity, power generation, and waste management. Likewise, there must be fair payment for environmental services provided by our biomes to the planet at large, as a way to recognize the economic nature of environmental conservation activities. As I said before and stress now, we stand ready and remain open to international cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, as we have all affirmed back in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro during the Earth Summit, a conference chaired by Brazil, the right to development must be materialized in such a way as to equitably and sustainably respond to environmental and development needs of both current and future generations. It is with that spirit of collective responsibility and a shared future that I invite you all again today to support us in this mission. You can certainly count on Brazil. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you very much. We turn now to the Prime Minister of Bhutan, Prime Minister Tshering. The floor is yours.
Your Majesty, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I bring you warm greetings from His Majesty the King, Her Majesty the Queen, and people of Bhutan. It is a privilege to be participating in this summit, and I thank His Excellency President Joe Biden for inviting Bhutan and allowing us our voice to be heard at this important gathering. I also commend President Biden for bringing the United States back to the Paris Agreement. I feel that leadership will be catalytic in bringing the major economic leaders together to achieve our climate goals and dream for a healthy planet. Excellencies, in Bhutan, all our developmental activities are guided by the philosophy of gross national happiness, which was conceived by our kings. GNH balances gross socio-economic development with that of environmental and cultural conservation. In line with the principles of GNH, our Constitution mandates us to maintain at least 60% of our total area under forest cover for all times to come. As of today, the actual forest cover is about 71%, with more than 50% of the land area protected as national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biological corridors. Our main source of energy is renewable hydropower. That is why we are not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative. Our Constitution also requires us to maintain intergenerational equity when it comes to natural resources. These environmental credentials have originated from the Golden Throne and are legally binding. What more NDCs can we pledge? Yet, leaving no room for complacency, we are drafting our second NDC, which will be even more ambitious. This is a clear indication that though small and economically challenged, we have realized beyond doubt that sustainable development path is the right way in the long run. But even with our efforts, we remain highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We face increasing threats from extreme climate events such as flash floods, glacial lake outbursts, windstorms, forest fires, and landslides. I cannot understand this irony of contributing a lot to environment preservation, yet having to suffer so much. Despite our own challenges as chair of the LDC, we have tried our best. Last December, we hosted the Thimphu Ambition Summit to build global political momentum on climate ambition and action. Excellencies, the commitment made by Bhutan and other LDCs represent a small fraction of what is needed to reduce emissions by 2030. We urge all countries, particularly the major emitters, to set more ambitious targets well ahead of COP26. Climate finance is key to leverage climate actions and to implement the enhanced NDCs of the developing countries. Therefore, delivery of the $100 billion per year commitment is critical. At the same time, COP26 should begin deliberations on a new finance goal. This should be based on science and the needs of the developing countries. It must also be complemented with the transfer of green technologies, which are environmentally sustainable, disaster resilient, and contribute to green development. Excellencies, in raising our climate ambition, Bhutan is ready for climate action on the ground. We have mainstreamed climate action into all our developmental plans and are formulating enhanced NDCs and a long-term strategy to enhance that we remain carbon neutral for all times to come. But we need the global community to support our resolve. Governments, bilateral institutions, banks, private sectors, and the scientific community must come together before it is too late. We would now like to see major economies provide leadership for some real-time action on the ground. I thank you all and Tashidele.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. It's a pleasure now to call upon the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm not sure we're hearing you here. Yes, yes.
Our annual projection updates and quarterly carbon reporting. We are well on the way to meet and beat our Paris commitments, and will update our long-term emissions reduction strategy for Glasgow. Achieving our 2030 target will see emissions per capita fall by almost half of our emissions per unit of GDP by 70%. Already, we have reduced our emissions by 19% on 2005 levels, I should say, more than most other similar economies, and by 36% when you exclude exports. We're deploying renewable energy 10 times faster than the global average per person. We have the highest uptake of rooftop solar in the world. Australia is on the pathway to net zero. Our goal is to get there as soon as we possibly can through technology that enables and transforms our industries, not taxes that eliminate them and the jobs and livelihoods they support and create, especially in our regions. For Australia, it is not a question of if or even by when for net zero, but importantly, how. That is why we're investing in priority new technology solutions through our Technology Investment Roadmap initiative. We're investing around $20 billion to achieve ambitious goals that will bring the cost of clean hydrogen, green steel, energy storage and carbon capture to commercial parity. We expect this to leverage more than $80 billion in investment in the decade ahead. In Australia, our ambition is to produce the cheapest green hydrogen in the world at $2 per kilogram Australian. Mr. President, in the United States, you have the Silicon Valley. Here in Australia, we are creating our own hydrogen valleys, where we will transform our transport industries, our mining and resource sectors, our manufacturing, our fuel and energy production. In Australia, our journey to net zero is being led by world-class pioneering Australian companies like Fortescue, led by Dr. Andrew Forrest, Visy, BHP, Rio Tinto, AGL, and so many more of all sizes. It is also being pioneered by our agricultural and marine sectors through soil science and sustainable fisheries. Marine protected areas in Australia are approaching 40% of our waters. We have already funded over 100 cutting-edge projects to safeguard our global treasure, the Great Barrier Reef, and are committing a further $100 million to protect our oceans, coastal ecosystems, and pioneer blue carbon initiatives to mitigate climate change. We're also providing $1.5 billion in practical climate finance, focusing on our Blue Pacific family partners in our region. Mr. President, we want to work with others on the how, through our new International Technology Partnerships program led by Australia's former Chief Scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel. My government is committed to playing its part in making COP26 a success in Glasgow, and you can always be sure that the commitments Australia makes to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are bankable. We have proven performance, transparent emissions accounting, and transformative technology targets to unlock pathways to net zero. Future generations, my colleagues and excellencies, will thank us, not for what we have promised, but what we deliver. And on that score, Australia can always be relied upon. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. It's a pleasure now to turn to the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Prime Minister Brown.
Thank you. Big heads, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I thank President Biden for convening this very important gathering to address the most significant threat facing our one planet and our one humanity. We're grateful that the United States and China have pledged to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and we look forward to swift action in their transitioning into carbon neutral economies. We urge other emitting nations to follow this vital example set by the United States and China. Remind that the 44 members of the Alliance of Small Island States, through no fault of their own, confront the greatest threats of climate change. The 44 AOSIS members are the least contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, but the most affected by climate change. Collectively, they emit just 1.5% of the emissions of industrialized nations. And many of them have already begun to roll out ambitious programs to reduce their small carbon footprint, particularly in renewable energy. They made ambitious national commitments at COP21 in Paris, and they remain passionately committed to implementing them within their means. However, the harmful effects of climate change are growing, and the cost of mitigation and recovery is being counted in human lives and livelihoods. The economic situation of our countries was already grave before the COVID-19 pandemic. It is now dire, particularly for tourism-dependent nations. We are literally teetering on the edge of despair. Over the years, the debt of small states has risen to unsustainable levels because of repeated borrowings to rebuild and recover from continuous debilitation by natural disasters arising from climate change. Mechanisms introduced by the international financial institutions, the IFIs, for addressing the looming debt crisis are insufficient. For some small states, even these inadequate instruments are denied because of the false criterion of middle and high per capita income, which ignores the huge vulnerabilities that small states face. It is urgent that policymakers of the IFIs instruct that more determining criteria of small size, resource constraints, and vulnerabilities be taken fully into account for concessional financing. Colleagues, repayment of official debt by small states, including to the Paris Club, is near impossible in the prevailing parlous circumstances. A permanent solution to the looming debt crisis is compelling and necessary. This requires action to design new and innovative financial instruments and to provide debt relief, including debt cancellation, debt suspension, debt rescheduling, debt restructuring, and debt for climate swaps. Worsening climate conditions are uprooting workers from previously productive sectors and causing a crisis of immigration and refugees. This too must be reversed in the global interest. We should acknowledge the interconnectedness of our human civilization, and we need to respect and protect our common humanity. Small states are also economic markets, providing revenues and employment for larger enriched nations. Every major country benefits perennially from trade surpluses with small states. To continue to be viable markets, to remain viable democracies that uphold human rights and the rule of law, to achieve climate justice, and to provide economic conditions that discourage refugees, we need the following. We need urgent access to COVID-19 vaccines, which should be prioritized based on vulnerability. We need immediate action to cut greenhouse gas emissions, a program of debt forgiveness and debt rescheduling, concessional financing that takes account of vulnerabilities, and funding to compensate for damage to help to reconstruct our economies, and funding to acquire decarbonized technologies to assist in building resilience. Excellencies, it is our hope that a spirit of cooperation will emerge from this gathering of 40 that can be taken to Glasgow to inspire an ambitious program of action to achieve net zero by 2050. I thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. It's now a pleasure to call upon the President of the United Mexican States, President López Obrador. Mr. President.
Empiezo explicando que aunque hemos
Start by explaining that even though we have discovered 3 very important hydrocarbon deposits, the oil that we are discovering now will be used basically to satisfy domestic demand. And we will not export crude oil and buy gasoline. Therefore, we will avoid the excessive use of fossil fuels. We are also updating our hydroelectric plants to reduce the use of carbon in the production of electricity. The energy that is produced with water is clean and is cheap. Therefore, we have decided that we will change all turbines for very updated equipment, and therefore this will allow us to be able to take advantage of the waters that we have in the dams, and we will be able to produce more energy without building new dams and without affecting the environment. The third proposal is to share with you, especially with you, President Biden, a very successful experience that we had. We are currently implementing the program Sowing Lives, and maybe this is the largest effort of reforestation that we have seen in the world. Therefore, we can say that we have 450,000 agricultural workers that receive 5,000 pesos a month to be able to plant fruits trees in their lands. We have planted 700 million plants, and we will reach 1 billion to be able to cover 1 million hectares. The budget is $1.4 million. The proposal is that together we will expand that program in the south of Mexico and in Central America, so that we will be able $3 billion additional plants and to generate 1,200,000 jobs. We assume our economic responsibility, and we are committed to help in organizing this. And you, President Biden, will be able to finance this program So in Life in Guatemala, in Honduras, and El Salvador. We have to take into account that with 4 million hectares of trees, we can absorb 70 million tons of CO2 per year. I just want to add another proposal. Very respectful. The U.S. government could offer to those that participate in this program that maybe after working in their lands for 3 consecutive years, they would be able to get a temporary working permit, and after 3 or 4 more years, maybe they could obtain even legal residency in the U.S. or keep double nationality. So the migration phenomenon, as we all are aware of, is not going to be solved by force, but with justice and well-being. You, President Biden, is a very sensitive person, and you know very well that the spirit of work, the desire to improve that the immigrants show is fundamental for the development of nations. They're migrants. Migrants are exceptional people, and those are the people that help in the development of different nations. We have to order these migration flows and organize them in a very human way and in a very practical manner, with the love of nature and the responsibility to give to the future generations a planet where they can be able to live. We also have to think that we are brothers in the universal way. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, President Lopez Obrador. It's now a pleasure to turn to the President of the Gabonese Republic, President Ondimba.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, unprecedented changes causing unseasonal and extreme weather conditions increasingly affects millions around the world. Food production systems and water supplies are threatened. Over half of Africa's countries are predicted to experience climate-driven conflict. Around the world, forests are burning. The Congo Basin, one of Earth's lungs, safely stores billions of tons of carbon. It must be preserved if we are to restrict global warming to 1.5 degrees. Fortunately, science tells us that the Congo Basin is more resilient to the effects of climate change than other tropical rainforests. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Gabon has 88% forest cover with low deforestation. We are well on our way to achieving 30% protected areas by 2030. We are net carbon positive. absorbing 4 times more CO2 than we emit. By investing in sustainable forestry, we can create a green economy that generates jobs and livelihoods whilst preserving forests. A nature-based solution to fight climate change with massive co-benefits for biodiversity and climate. However, we live in a climate democracy, and no individual country can escape the catastrophic results of our collective actions. Africa only contributes a fraction of global emissions, but we are the continent which is paying the biggest price. It is therefore crucial that climate finance, including climate debt swaps, be used to bring equity to the costs of adaptation in Africa. That is why the African heads of state formed the African Adaptation Initiative in Paris. And that is why just 2 weeks ago, African heads of state came together to launch a program to accelerate adaptation in Africa. Africa calls on the developed nations to shoulder your historic responsibility by replenishing the GCF. I congratulate Joe Biden for his leadership. We are on course for disaster. It is our collective responsibility to act immediately and at an unprecedented global scale to limit the climate change crisis. There is no time to lose. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I now give the floor to the President of the Republic of Colombia, President Duque. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. President.
Excelencias, Presidente Biden, Secretario Blinken.
President Biden, Secretary Blinken, it's an honor for me to be part of this marvelous meeting. And I want to start by saying that there is no doubt that climate change is the main challenge of our times. A country like Colombia represents 0.6% of the greenhouse effect at the global level. However, we are among the 20 more vulnerable countries due to climate change. Vis-a-vis that reality, we have to be bold, be decisive, and we have to act now. And this is why Colombia has been very clear in that when we go to Glasgow with 2 commitments. First, that we will get to 2030 reducing 51% of our greenhouse gases. And we have established that goal to neutral carbon for 2050. These are not just promises, these are objectives that are based on the actions that we are taking from now on. First of all, is regarding the energy transformation. When we took over, only 0.5% of our electrical grid was fed by renewable energy. And our objective, based on the decisions that we have taken, is that for August of next year, we will have 14% of that. So this jump is very, very impressive. Second, is to go into cleaner energies. Thanks to the incentives that we have created, we already have the urban electrical fleet, the largest one in Latin America, and the cargo transportation as well. We also took measures in the fight against deforestation, and we are going to plant 180 million plants by the end of 2022. And in December of this year, we will have more than 100 million trees planted. This is a circular economy where we have to produce by conserving and conserve by producing. And it is a and this will affect the different industries. We also started initiative with different countries that are present here today in the work in the Amazon region. And we have no doubt that in the solution of nature-based will be very, very positive, and we have to start signing the contracts for the protection of our environment. I have to mention that we have to have a 21st century environmental ethics, where we have to urge our kids and our young people that we be aware on how to reduce our carbon footprint. And I want to take advantage of this opportunity, President Biden and Secretary Blinken. It's very important that all of us present, we have to subscribe to the agreement of the protection of the environment. There are 74 countries that have already signed this, but we want more countries to sign this. It is very important to use the development institutions like the Inter-American Development Bank for tools that will finance these policies so that we can get to net zero emission. And the third, I just wanted to share with you that it's very urgent that we have new mechanisms so that we can have debt for adoption swap. And I would like to, by closing, President Biden, Secretary Blinken, 50% of our territory is forest. We are 30% of 6% of the Amazon basin. We are the second country in the world with more biodiversity per square kilometer, and we have 50% of the high mountain environments. Our contribution in fighting this climate change is to protect that treasure. And if Colombia, that represents only 0.6% of the greenhouse effects, establishes a goal to reduce them by 51% by 2030, we hope that those actions will also be supported and be as an example of countries that are the heavier contributors. And the only way to save our planet would be to work together. We have to be aware that the issue of sustainability is what we have to follow. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's now a pleasure to call upon the President of the Republic of Turkey, President Erdogan. The floor is yours.